Hey and welcome back. And in this lesson we are going to look at cryptomattes. Now cryptomattes are probably one of my favorite things when it comes to compositing because it's just amazing and it makes a lot of things so much easier. So let me show you what a cryptomatte is. So I'm going to drag in the render sequence again, and I'm going to drag it on top of our composition, so just above the ambient occlusion. And now I want to add a new effect called Cryptomatte to this layer. So you can either go to Effects, 3D Channel, and you'll see Cryptomatte here, or you can use the FX console and just search for Cryptomatte and then just apply that to that layer. And then you're going to see something interesting happening here in the viewport. You can see all of these objects with different colors. And this means we can actually extract a mask from any of these objects, and then we can manipulate them using an adjustment layer. So let me show you what I mean. So first of all, this output, I like to change this to matte only, and this will just give us a black and white matte that we can then use with a adjustment layer. So if you click around in the scene, you can now select different objects and it will create a mask for you, or a matte. So you can see I can click on one of these barrels, or I can click on the floor, or I can click on the zombie, and you can actually see the zombie has got some different parts to it. So let me just zoom in here slightly, and you can see, just zoom into 200%. If I click on the zombie, let me just, so you can see the zombie consists of these different parts. So I can select the pants basically, hold in shift and then click to select that part as well. And if you scrub through, you can see that it's actually following the complete animation. So that's a perfect matte that we can use. So let's zoom out and see what we can do with these cryptomattes. So let's say we want to change the color of one of these barrels. Let's say this blue barrel right here. We want to change the color of this barrel. So what we can do is let's bring this cryptomatte layer back and just click on this barrel, so it only selects this one barrel. Now if you click and nothing is happening, make sure that this cryptomatte effect is actually highlighted, and then you can click and that will then select that for you. So if we zoom out, make sure that's the only object that's selected. So if you scrub through, you can see that nothing else has been selected, and that's all we need. So we need that black and white mask. So I'm going to rename this to, or this layer to barrel mask or barrel matte. Okay, so that's our barrel matte. And now I'm going to create an adjustment layer. So create a new adjustment layer, place it anywhere, and now you can, where it says track matte, you can use one of your layers as a matte. So I'm going to use the barrel matte that we just created, and then right next to the track matte you can specify if the matte is an alpha matte or if it's a luma matte. Now if we look at the matte that we created and we enable the alpha channel right here, you can see this matte does not have an alpha channel. So there's no transparency, it's just black and white. So this is a luma matte. So just switch off that layer again, and then on that adjustment layer make sure to toggle this to luma matte. Alright, so now that adjustment layer is using the luma matte, this barrel luma matte, and we can add any effects now on top of this adjustment layer. So let's zoom in here, look at our barrel, and I'm going to add an effect. Let's just see where to find these effects. So under color correction, I'm going to add a hue and saturation. So now I can enable colorize, I can increase the saturation, and now I can just toggle through these hues and I can change the color of that barrel to anything I want. So if I want a green barrel, maybe bring down the saturation a bit, or you can increase it if you want to. And you can see we can just change the color of that one item or that one object in our scene. If we don't want to change the color and maybe we just want to adjust the exposure, we can do that. So I'm going to add an exposure effect to the adjustment layer, and now we can just adjust the exposure of that one object in the scene. Another thing that you can do is let's add a curves and now we can kind of control the shadows and the highlights of that one object, which is great. You can also go in, you can maybe add a blur effect. If you maybe want to blur only that one object, you can do it with this as well. So you can see there I'm kind of blurring that whole object. Obviously it looks a bit weird now because we're not blurring the edges. If you want to blur the matte as well, I can copy and paste this effect onto that matte as well. So now you can see we're blurring the matte, which is looking a little bit weird. But maybe if we add something like a camera lens blur, then we'll get a better effect. Let's copy that onto our adjustment layer as well. And always make sure to switch off the matte. You don't want to see the matte in your composition. You're just using it to control this adjustment layer. So yeah, you can do things like that. So we can blur it. Let me just remove this blur from the matte again. And yeah, so any effect that you can think of, you can add it on the adjustment layer and then use that Crytomatte to kind of isolate that one object in your scene. Let's try and do something with these sandbags. So I'm going to delete all of these layers and let's just bring in our render layer again. And I'm going to add a Crytomatte effect to that. Let's change this to matte only. And now I'm just going to click around and see where these sandbags are. So I'm going to select this sandbag, hold in shift, click on this one. And if you accidentally selected something else and you want to deselect a layer, just hold in control and then click, and that will then remove that from the matte. So I only want to have these two sandbags like that. And now I want to just call this sandbag matte, like so. And now I can switch off this layer because we don't want to see that matte. Now we're going to add an adjustment layer, and I want to change the color of these sandbags to maybe like a darker brown. So I'm going to add a hue and saturation onto that adjustment layer, and then we need to tell the adjustment layer to use the sandbag matte. And remember, this is not an alpha matte, but it's a luma matte. So just change that to luma. And now we can go ahead and we can enable colorize on this hue and saturation effect, and we can change the color of those sandbags. So I can maybe do saturation up a bit just to find the exact color that I want, maybe like a brownish color like that. And then we can bring down the saturation again, and then we can bring down the lightness and the darkness as well. So I want to bring it down so it's more like a darker brown, something like that. So now you can see if I toggle this adjustment layer on and off, you can see that's quite a big difference, and that's using Crytomattes. So now we can just rename this maybe sandbag adjustment. So you can add more effects on here as well if you maybe want to do something else with it. Let's see what else we can add. Maybe if we bring in a levels, we can control the shadows of only that specific object in the scene, or you can play with the highlights as well. All these different things that you can do just by using a Crytomatte. So what I want to do, if I look at the scene, this well looks a little bit too bright for me. So I want to use a Crytomatte to bring the brightness a little bit down on this well here on the side. So I'm going to bring in my render again, and I'm going to add a Crytomatte effect to that layer. And then I want to change this to matte only, and we're going to click just to select our well. And then I'm just going to rename this layer to well matte, so we know what that is. Switch it off, and now I'm going to create my adjustment layer. You can add the adjustment layer anywhere, and make sure that this adjustment layer is now using the well matte, and let's set that to a luma matte, not an alpha matte. And now we can add maybe an exposure control or exposure effect to that adjustment layer, and I can just change the exposure on just the well, and you can see what we're doing there, just kind of matching it with the environment around it, and that's already feeling a lot better. I think the sandbags are a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to bring that up a bit, maybe -40. Yeah, that looks better. And let's rename this top layer now to well adjustment. Always good to rename your layers, so when you come back to it, it's always kind of easy to see what you're doing. Alright, so that looks pretty good. I think go ahead and add some of these adjustment layers and create some mats using Crytomattes, and see what you can do with some of these objects. Maybe change their color, maybe blur them slightly more or less. Maybe just change their exposure. See what you can do by using a Crytomatte. And it's just a really easy way to isolate certain objects and to change their look or values. So go ahead and save your project and play around a bit, and I will see you in the next lesson.